Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, even in a mature democracy, the poster child of democracy all around the world, the United fucking States of America, you have so much political infighting from both sides of the house. What more in a post-colonial state, nascent democracy, of which you have very immature and emerging judicial, executive, and legislative branches? Side opposition has to pick a frame because if closing opposition wants to respond to us and characterize it in a way na, no, they're all unified, people are Gucci, they're happy, they're all good, then these people would be politically mature enough to understand that, yeah, brah, censorship's important in order to protect ourselves from the bad guys who are probably out there. The bad guys that opening opposition talked about, given that they're worried about violence and dissent, and they were doing this like weird burden push and asking about genocide and all that. What we told you, coming from closing government, is outcome and path independent, whether or not people are chill and happy and good and they understand, or it's a volatile situation, precisely because we're not here to just like arrest people for no fucking reason, like Nazi Germany with the Popo and Jespot and all that. We are actually here to just be able to censor. That's why my partner's case still stands, of which we heard no response to coming from the previous speaker. We told you that in order to not have a fucking civil war, we do things like censorship. It's a stage one kind of thing. But to be consistent with our principle, if push comes to shove, we're very much willing to have martial law, like what we saw in the Philippines and in Burma, to be able to curtail uncertain freedom in order to prevent the backtrack and erosion of the very democratic system that you fought so hard to place. My partner grounds this debate in post-colonial state, meaning before having this newly elected democracy, you probably went through ethnic cleansing, a genocide, mass assassinations, and even war, ladies and gentlemen, to be able to prop up the very leaders right now who are there, the very individuals we think have to be protected. On closing government, we told you three things. Number one, the nuance to post-colonial states and how there are likely active threats given your volatile past, something opening didn't really do. Number two, we explain why it has to be strong censorship and how this comes upstream towards the violence and pushback we get from the other side. In fact, it becomes a way to be able to mitigate that, the stage one thing I was saying earlier. Thirdly, and most importantly, we characterize the transition of people within that particular state when we talk about how censorship becomes the ultimate way to be able to be a check and balance against a lot of those oppressive ideologies, and we built to you the counterfactual. In order to bolster a sense of national identity, which absent censorship probably won't happen because you have so much propaganda and breakaway groups trying to forward their own legitimacy because every opposition party feels like they are actually legit, is a point in which you actually undermine the state. We think that in order to be able to deal with that, we have to be preemptive in nature, and this is spinning what the previous speaker told us. In fact, what you have about censorship is preemptive in nature because we rather accidentally catch a cool bearded guy who owns a watch shop and say, oh bro, I didn't do anything, as opposed to like not cracking down or catching anyone and letting that guy go to be able to prop up like a fucking IED or be able to do something like rig elections, which happened previously, something that people are so traumatized about. Before I move on to closing up, go for it, opening up, last shot.
You never give a positive comparator. People don't like the government, this burst out in a greater sense. I'm still not sure why you have the ability to solve that. We can do that by discourse at least.
A national sense of identity, which happens when you tell people that, hey, we have to restrict certain freedoms given the bad things we went for. And as a consequence, brother, you can't post on social media. I hope it won't kill you. Let's deal with closing opposition. Firstly, closing opposition talked about, and they said, why would these particular majoritarian elected governments curtail on freedom? Because of what my partner's extension was about. It's not as simplistic as democracy equals do whatever you like, equals you were voted by majority, therefore not doing that is bad. We talked to you about how it doesn't exist in a vacuum and there are instances where you have to curtail in it for the greater good. Number two, in terms of the interim government, that's quite interesting as a characterization. We think that the fact that you have to have an interim government between the colonial state and where we are right now goes to show the political volatility, of which you probably worked hard to be able to transition from that interim government to be able to get the change you want. Thirdly, the idea about Trump. Let's flip that example. We think that everything we saw with Trump, with his strong sense of protectionism, actually led the guy to almost getting blasted out of this earth. He almost got headshot, gang, and you might not like him, but we think it's probably bad if people try to execute you, and we think his very own ideologies, because it infringed on people's rights, actually got the dude re-elected, ladies and gentlemen, with a landslide versus the previous party. Fourthly, in terms of how you fragment the group, ladies and gentlemen, we need to understand how right now they already are fragmented, and in order to be able to have a sense of national cohesion, we need to be able to remove the noise. Yes, it's a transition. It won't happen overnight. We're not saying everyone will be kumbaya, but at least we're able to deal with the active threats of democracy. That's why we take it over closing opposition, because we responded to them. Why do we take it over opening up? Because their only standing material, net of my partner's responses, were this idea of a global actor, money, other communities and people. In order for your state to be seen as not sketch, you have to break away free from your colonial shackles. And that can only happen when you have a strong sense of authoritarianism. Because the intuition pump here is at any time you allowed the soft democracy to take its course, you had a lot of things like hyperinflation, very big governments, and essentially civil war and unrest. It became a rogue state, ladies and gentlemen. Why do we take it above our opening? We took it above our opening because our opening correctly paints a sense of urgency and they question the whole situation. But we really nuanced it to what happens post-colonial and how you have a context of the past which actually make the present kind of sketchy, something that opposition side has to deal with. And ultimately, we actually mapped out why it has to be a strong sense of censorship and gave you characterizations in relation to how that's done in terms of doing things like infringe on freedom of the press, etc. And also our positive material and impact about having a sense of national identity that actually bolsters the capacity for your nascent government to be able to blossom and transition to the democracy it's meant to be. We are very proud to stand on side proposition.